Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a long afternoon for you, but you have your coffee, so I suppose that you're still awake. Bear with us for another session, which will last about 40 minutes. So you will be prepared with questions, and I would like to invite back the speakers to the stage at some point of time during this moderation session. Welcome again to the 5th edition of the iSR Forum on the theme of peace through sport. And each year, this forum has been exploring different issues of importance in the Olympic movement. So in celebrating upcoming Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games and Paralympics, which we aspire to be a peace Olympics, so the topic we looked into today is very timely and worthy of our attention. So in that matter, I'm very honored and privileged to be able to listen to the presentations of the three speakers. And I would like to hope that these insights, ideas, and recommendations of those who have extensive knowledge and experience in the field of peace and sports. And I hope this will bring the Pyeongchang Olympic Games to contribute to building momentum for peace in the region of rising tension. Let me invite back the three speakers who gave very insightful talk today back to the stage. And Mr. David Miller, I'm sorry that you have to walk back and forth. To my left, we have Mr. David Miller, sports journalist and official IOC historian. We have Dr. Guy Podler, Chair of Department of Asian Studies, University of Haifa in Israel, and Professor Nam Gi-cho, Professor of Sookmyung Women's University in Physical Education Department. Thank you. Welcome again. Well, we often hear that sports is a catalyst for peace and harmony. And we also hear that sports has the power to change the world. Yet, we do not know exactly how they work together to connect each other. So I suppose your presentation helped us to understand better at individual level, societal level, community level, and perhaps to the state level. However, since we're doing this forum to bring success to the Pyeongchang Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, I want to connect your historic academic knowledge to the reality and try to put this in practice. I have tailor-made questions for each speaker, and probably it's not very much connected to your presentation, but I'm sure I can tease your brain a little bit. Well, my first question goes to Mr. David Miller. I read your bio, and it seems like you have covered, as a journalist, 24 Olympic Games, 14 World Cups, 60 Wimbledons, and many other competitions in different sports. This is like the Olympic record, isn't it?
I'm old.
So as you remember, possibly vividly, about this whole Olympic Games of 1988, the legacies, one of the legacies of 1988's whole Olympic game was peace and reconciliation, which served as a prologue to the breakdown of the Cold War. And after 2 consecutive Olympic Games, which were boycotted by 2 different blocs, including US bloc against the 80 Moscow Olympic Games, and Soviet bloc against the 84 LA Olympic Games, Seoul Olympic Games, if I remember correctly, marked the largest participation in the history of Olympic Games at that time. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Whether intended or not, Korea used the opportunity to establish diplomatic relations with socialist countries at the moment. And now it has been 30 years on since the 88 Olympic Games. And now we're proclaiming again that Pyeongchang Olympics should be a peace Olympic Games. However, I remember being part of the bidding process, and the Olympic legacy that we pursued at the bidding process was not peace, but it was about young generation, being a hub for Asian winter sports, and the DREAM program. So I'm a bit puzzled about the changed vision of Pyeongchang at the moment. So Mr. Miller, how is the Olympic environment now different than 30 years ago? And whether you think the similar pursuit of vision and legacy is appropriate? And that will be the question for you.
I think the nature of your question probably needs several hours, which we don't have. Firstly, I think it needs to be said that problems surrounding the Olympic Games when they occur are nearly always the responsibility of politicians and not of people in sport. You refer to the boycotts, which were, in the event, totally pointless and achieved nothing other than the regrettable absence of would-be experienced, outstanding athletes from participating in the Games. The first boycott, 76, was pitifully unnecessary. Africans were wanting to consult the IOC about a political issue, which was the participation of some predominantly Western competitors playing against South Africa and New Zealand in particular, playing rugby against South Africa, rugby not being an Olympic sport. African representatives in Montreal attempted over several days, because they were obliged by the political body, the Organization of African Unity, to try and make some kind of protest. They weren't able to contact Michael Kalinin, the president, and only 24 hours before the Games began, Africans started leaving. You then had the boycott of 80, an American-led exercise which denied Moscow any number of prominent athletes, and then a retaliatory boycott of 84 Los Angeles. The officials of the IOC tried in vain to negotiate with politicians, in vain. And the truth of the total lack of achievement in political terms, a year after Los Angeles, I was in Berlin for the annual session and talking to Marat Gramov, the Minister of Sport for Russia, Soviet Union as it then was, and a member of the IOC. And he said to me, the boycotts, all they do is damage our sporting achievements, our sporting representation. I'm sure that we will be in Seoul. By that time, 85, of course, Seoul having been elected in 1981. And it was pathetic that the actions of politicians, totally needlessly, had destroyed the goodwill and the ambience of 3 Olympic Games. And I hope that that lesson has been learned and that similar procedures won't happen again.
So I suppose you are asking for sports without intervention of politics. Thank you. Out of all the Olympic, throughout the Olympic history that you have observed, what would you point out as the best Olympic legacies so far?
Olympic legacy? In respect of what initiatives? Are you looking at the games in general, what they do socially?
Games and the vision?
I I don't think the vision has changed since the time of the Greeks. We, the Olympians, honor the truth and the legitimacy of competition, whether you win or lose. And one of the aspects that the public, as well as athletes, need to remember is that in an Olympic Games, there are, if there are 10,000 competitors, there are probably, shall we say, 9,700 or so losers. Most of the people who go to the Olympic Games, and in all sport, are going to be losers, because you can only have in any one event one winner. And so therefore the nature of sport from the time of the Greeks until today and the future is that sport, and especially the Olympic Games, teach us to live with one another, to be generous, to accept that there are losers. The Olympics and sport are a microcosm of life. They teach us, I think, how to behave. I was a would-be Olympian. I didn't get into the team in 1956. But what sport does is help, much of the time, to teach people a way of life, to be generous, to be sympathetic, to be friendly, and one hopes it enables us to make friends across the world.
That's a great thing about being an Olympian, I suppose. Thank you very much, Mr. Whitler. The second question probably is tailored for Professor Cho. It was an interesting thought about bringing nudge effect to look at how behavioral change could be encouraged, if I understood correctly. Olympic movement has three main pillars, as you know. It's not only about sports, but it's also about culture and education. So in order to have this nudge effect, to bring peace as an important value and to be disseminated to the Olympic participants and audience, can you suggest any educational or cultural programs or maybe campaign that can be devised and practiced prior to or during the Olympic Games, perhaps during the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games?
Well, I think I cannot point out just one specific program that can, occurred before or after or during the Olympic Games, because as you know, there are tons of programs occurred before, during, and after. So rather than just pointing out just one program, I would say, as I claimed with the slide, we need to provide diverse strategies. That's my point actually, and the strategies need to be implemented in diverse programs. That's my second point. So just one specific program, then nothing is reminded at this point. Olympic value education is one of them, and there are tons of programs. So cannot just designate just one program. However, repeatedly, I would say, strategies. Something new comes up to our society to change our behavior, the way that we want to go. We need to positively and actively implement the strategies into the program. Then we might increase the rate of their behavioral change, the possibility of their behavioral change with the newly adopted strategies.
For the nudge effect, I have two sons, and I definitely need that fly sticker in our toilet. But thank you very much for the presentation, and some ideas. Final question, Taylor, for Dr. Podler. You were talking about state-to-state relationship through sports, and followed by the 2018 Pyeongchang, there will be 2020 Tokyo Summer Olympic Games, and then followed by 2022 Beijing Winter Olympic Games. So there will be 3 consecutive Olympic Games in this very region of rising tension. How should this opportunity be utilized for building peace in East Asia rather than intensifying the national competitions? Being an outsider of the region, perhaps you have some ideas.
Well, actually, I'm not an outsider. I'm Asian too.
You're partly insider too.
On the far west of the continent.
Absolutely.
I think, first of all, I heard at least twice today the slogan of sports can change the world. And I think if we say that, we are off to a goose chase. I think we should say sports can help change the world. Because if we say sports can change the world, then we believe that we focus on sports. I try to emphasize in my talk, sports can change, can help. We need other layers, other platforms, other ways of connecting in order for sport to be an important vehicle in facilitating relations, in easing tensions. So when you ask about the future games that are about to take place in Asia, of course, they have a lot of potential of easing tensions, of bringing different nations, different states together. And you said in your question, nationalist competitive or something. I think there's nothing bad with that. I mean, as long as we keep it in the correct or in the proper borders, metaphysical or theoretical borders. I'm not talking about only borders between states. So my point is that the future games have a lot of potential in easing tensions, but there will not be enough. Other layers of connections of relations have to be implemented between politicians, between officials, different layers. The media has a role in it. So we have to look at it in a holistic way rather than just focusing on the events themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the answer. Would you like to add?
If I could add to what Mr. Patola said, in the preface to the 88 Games, with the threat of a problem from North Korea, DPR Korea, in those days, Samaranch, the president of the IOC, made 17 trips to Seoul to try to ensure that there was harmony and peace. And in conjunction with the Korea National Olympic Committee, made repeated offers, recommendations to North Korea to be involved. This continued to within less than 6 months of the staging of the Games. In the event, North Korea did not collaborate, and it, I think, was always likely that would be so. But the door was kept open by sport. The problem of sport in terms of international politics is that it is not industrial. It's not an economy. It doesn't make money for people. It mostly, sad to say, up to the present time has been losing money for some countries who are hosts. So the lack of the economic element of the Olympic Games means that it lacks the power that moves politicians. And that, sadly, is the weakness. And the Olympics can be as honorable as possible, forgetting some of the cheating that goes on, as honorable as possible, but it lacks political power.
Thank you. I think the essence of sports and games goes beyond the level of abstract terms. So therefore, it is important to think about certain mechanism, procedures, goals, perhaps the right timing to use sports as an effective tool. Without further delay, I would like to open the Q&A session to the floor, and I would like to invite questions from the audience. So if you have questions, before asking questions, please briefly introduce yourself. So do I have a hand up?
Thank you very much for your excellent speech. However, we didn't hear the real topic of our country. So, as you know, we have a tension between South and North Korea. So, do you have any ideas about easing tensions or resolve conflict between two South and North Korea through sports?
Mr. Miller, can I just make a comment about it?
Especially Mr. Professor Podler, you gave us good information about easing tension, Arab countries, so Israel and between Israel and other countries. Yeah.
I would like to address the question to Dr. Podler, but Professor Cho has something to add.
Before you make a comment about it, just let me small talk about. I was told that Mr. Miller said 18 times of visit North Korea of Samaranchi, right? And I would suggest based upon that fact, okay, Thomas Bauer probably if Thomas Bauer visit 18 times, it could probably is reserved. Am I right?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I would probably like to begin with maybe a rough statement saying sport will not bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. I mean, sport can be a way of easing tensions and together with diplomatic relationships, but we cannot expect from sport, for any sports event, to bring peace to the peninsula. Take, for example, we had several times friendly football matches between South Korean and North Korean teams. So friendly football matches, and we will see what will be in the Winter Olympic Games next year here in Seoul, if the North Korean team will arrive. So what I try to emphasize in my presentation, it should apply to the Korean case as well. We need gradual movements, gradual interactions. 1 event, 2 events, 15 events are not enough, especially here with the high level of tensions. So 1 more football match and 1 more athletic team that will go, and a taekwondo team that will come and compete. And at the same time, officials will talk with each other. So together, this multi-layered form of relationships, this will be the key, not 1 or 5. So I agree with you completely that sports has the potential of doing that, but we need to look at it in a much longer way of development of the relationships.
Thank you. Would you like to add some?
A couple of words. You will all remember here at this forum the effort of Dr. Kim Un-yong to get the joint marching of the 2 Korean teams in 2000 in Sydney, Australia. That was a lone moment of conciliation. But as I was saying a bit earlier, politicians in the main, particularly hard-line politicians, don't understand the possibilities that are offered by sport for integration, from easing, that Professor Podler has been talking about, the tensions that exist between different countries. And that's very sad, but I'm afraid is the nature of, as I was saying, the lack of power, real power, possessed and exerted by sport.
We are in desperation of someone's effort to make it work, to reduce the tension in the Korean Peninsula. Next question. I saw the hand up in the back.
First, I would like to thank Mr. Miller, Dr. Podler, and Dr. Cho for giving us such fruitful presentation about sports diplomacy and spirits of Olympics. I have a question specifically to Dr. Podler. Wouldn't be there also a possibility of degrading the status quo depending on the outcome of the games due to extreme sense of nationalism and make the relationship worse between the interstates?
Again, can you repeat the question? I didn't hear it well.
The
Wouldn't
last
be
part.
last part? And
Articulate.
oh, okay. Wouldn't be the possibility of the situation between interstates degrading even more due to the extreme sense of nationalism, which affects the outcome of the games?
Well, nationalism, of course, is a very important factor in these relationships. But again, on the one hand, nationalism has, of course, as you suggest in your question, we usually see it as it usually brings bad reactions or bad results between two states where each side becomes more nationalistic. But at the same time, it also has the potential of doing the reverse. I mean, it's okay to be proud in your country and to be, I don't know, to do all the symbolic things that, but depends to which radical, how radical you are. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is that at the same time, while you maintain your nationalist feelings towards your country and how proud you are when your athlete is the one winning, bringing the medals and everything, this is at the same time the potential of diffusing the tensions of two extreme nationalists meeting together on stage and showing that despite what seems to us at the first stage as extreme nationalism, they compete and they shake hands and they respect each other as athletes. Then we can see the nationalist element diffusing. So I agree that it has the potential of being of raising tensions, but at the same time of lowering them through sports.
If I can say, I think nationalism generates both the best and the worst of attitudes in the Olympics. Of course, every athlete is proud to represent their country. Teams are proud. But nationalism perverts some of the virtues that the three of us here have been talking about this afternoon. You had the instance, if I may give a specific, of Vancouver Winter Games 2010. Vancouver, for many years, Canada, has been sitting in the shadow of their huge, successful neighbor. And Canada determined, after being generous in nature and competition for so many years, that in Vancouver, having had a disaster in Calgary some years earlier of winning nothing at all, that Vancouver was going to be their moment. And they coined a slogan, "Own the podium," which was just dreadful. Because it generated such a mood of nationalism and ambition in Canada that everyone else, almost without exception, was objecting, either silently or vocally. Who do Canada think they are? Own the podium. It was the most awful promotion. And eventually they began to realize this. And in fact, it was so strange because everybody, in my experience, who participates in the Olympic Games loves the Canadians. They're lovely people. They're generous, friendly, and don't mind coming second. But after all the years of feeling runners-up, they thought, right, we're going to do it in Vancouver. And it generated an impossible amount of ill will, which fortunately by the end of the Games had dissolved, and nobody minded Canada actually doing very well and winning the hockey. but the nationalism that was there to begin with was just dreadful.
Thank you. Could I ask for another question from the audience? We have more hands up now.
First of all, thank you very much to Mr. Miller, Dr. Cho, and Dr. Podler for insightful and grateful presentations. My questions are directed to Dr. Podler. During your presentation, you have discussed about the international sports diplomacy. However, I'm also curious how sports can promote peace within a country. Also, since the U.S. national anthem protest started by a famous athlete is viral these days, how influential could the players be in promoting peace through sports?
So you mean countries where to ease tensions within a country through sports to bring?
Yes, for example, the Drogba with the
Well,
with the
yeah, this
Cote
raises
d'Ivoire.
the question of what should sports be a platform, an arena to express political opinions in the first place. It works. It works in both ways. I mean, you can. The same logic applies. I mean, you can use sports if there are countries, there are places where there are ethnic tensions or tensions between majority and minority. The same thing applies. You can use sport to ease those tensions through the agent that I mentioned earlier, the athletes, the media, the local leaders, and the leaders from the state level. If you ask about the recent incident in the U.S. with the sports when the anthem, well, this is the question is, it depends on your opinion. If you think that sports should be the place to express those political or any ideas, but basically, yes, the same logic applies to bring peace, alleviate tensions within a state with the same actors, with the same agents. The same thing applies when you look at interstate relations and relationships between different states. The same logic applies.
Thank you. I will take about one or two questions since we're short of time. Is there any other questions addressed to a particular speaker?
The field of sports development, for sports for development and peace. So this forum is very meaningful and informative to me. So thank you again for sharing your good opinion. But about question, because we have a good translator, so I use a Korean language for my question in order to deliver the proper meaning. 두 가지 질문이 있는데요. 한 가지 하나만 질문하겠습니다.
Can you hold on for a second for the interpreter? Who do you want to address
공동
the question
질문입니다.
to?
공통적으로 드리는 질문이라서 원하시는 분이 말씀을 해주시면 되겠는데 그 스포츠와 정치의 관계에 대해서 말씀을 드리고 싶어요. 그래서 세 분 다 강의를 해주셨을 때 스피치를 해주셨을 때 결국 스포츠와 정치 간의 관계에 대해서도 다 언급을 해주셨는데 스포츠와 정치가 결국 떨어질 수 없는 관계라고 생각을 하시는지 일단 이 부분에 관해서 스포츠의 독립성을 유지시키는 게 필요한지 혹시 필요하다면 어떤 방법이 있을지에 대해서 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
The question was about autonomy of sports, whether sports and politics could be separated.
If I could just make the particular point that it is contained in the IOC Charter that there shall be no demonstrative action, statements, emblems, whatever, portrayed, utilized in the course of the games. That the games are neutral, they're open to every political, religious, racial persuasion that there is, that all are equal. And of course, you will maybe remember, among others, the demonstration of the two American athletes in Mexico City raising black-gloved fists at the opening ceremony. They were sent home for a breach of Olympic regulations. I'm a firm believer, as a past would-be Olympian, that is, I don't say for the athletes to be sent home, but it is correct that political allegiances, protests, demonstrations should not be part of the Olympic program, because, simply to restate the basis, the games are equal for all people, and political divisions should be kept outside.
Well, I like a nationalism. There is a concept of competition in the nature of sports. So when you think of nationalism, as Mr. Mueller said, so there's kind of pros and cons together, which means when you without competition, sports cannot be survived. But if we boost the concept of competition too much, then nationalism can be more boosted up. So you know what I'm saying? However, without competition, sports cannot be survived, as I said, which means sense of belongingness is very imperative in sports. So we can think of both sides, the sense of belongingness and high level of competition, which we can choose, decide, what to, where to go. You understand what I'm saying?
Would you like to add some comments,
Uh,
Mr. Miller?
Briefly, there are two motives for the corruption of the games. One is nationalism, and the other is commercialism. Individual athletes will be encouraged to break the rules, to cheat, to take drugs, because it maybe facilitates a greater income, not actually from the games, but in the subsequent participation in other competitions. It will increase their salary, their income. Or the corruption is nationalism and wanting a country to succeed more than ever. And we get the situation that the IOC is still grappling with about the pervasive and extended corruption of drug testing in Russia that extended from 2011 to 2014. So those are the two items that are corrupting the games.
I think we have reception after this Q&A session, so you could approach individual speakers if you have further questions. I'm sure they will be available, hopefully. Yes, they will be available, so you'll be able to get a chance to talk to each speaker. I would like to give you 1 minute each for you to make the final comments, maybe conclusion, before I close down the session. Should Professor Cho start?
I was actually I took the English course when I entered the university when I was 20 years ago, and I learned one article. I get to the one article. The topic, the title was "Show Must Go On," and I would say sports must go on instead. Thank you.
Well, I think we can't say that we must separate sports from politics and then say sports and peace. It doesn't work together. The idea is to use sport as a diplomatic and political tool, but at the same time not to inject politics into sports the way we heard in this discussion today. Thank you.
Not because I'm sitting here in Seoul for one of many visits over the years, but and not because I want to be popular with you, but I have to say truthfully that the experience of the Seoul Games was a landmark for me, the demonstration of Asian courtesy and the openness with which Korea welcomed the world, I found totally exhilarating. And therefore it's been a great pleasure to repetitively be back here in Korea.
Thank you, speakers. I think the Olympic movement essentially is a peace movement. And I hope that the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games will be a great success and mark the new Olympic history with a treasured legacy. And I really hope that the International Sports Strategy Foundation will be at the forefront of that movement under the leadership of new President Yu. So for that matter, I'm closing this session with lots of hope, and I hope that hope will be delivered. So this closes the iSR Forum moderating session, and thank you for your attention. And please join us again, thanking this excellent panel to make this session educational. Thank you.